The way AI is going to disrupt manufacturing is coming from the two directions. Let's say the bottom level is something that they're playing with right now. It's at the beginning of robotics. At the top, it's going to become the knowledge level. The knowledge level, it means there will be, let's say your virtual digital format.
Welcome back to the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. Generally, our topics cluster around the front end of the business, around board governance and strategy, marketing, sales, and customer success. And many manufacturers have spent decades refining how they make stuff and how they operate. And they've got a lot of in-house experts and outside experts to help them with that. But another one of the themes is disruption. There's a lot of disruption in how companies buy, and therefore we need to disrupt how we sell. Buyer behaviors and technology are changing the way that companies and people research and buy. And so we have to make corresponding changes and disrupt the way that we market and sell. And today, this conversation is going to be, as I envision it, I think it's going to sit at the intersection of disruption and sales in some interesting ways. I'm joined today by Radu Spineanu. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He'll correct me on it. I should have that clearly figured out ahead of time. But he is the founder of HumbleOps. That's a company that's using AI to improve manufacturing. Radu recently started Humble, which is actually his third startup. He's had two successful exits. The first of his companies went public through an IPO in Romania. And the second, a company called 2Tap, was actually sponsored by YCombinator and Coastal Ventures, as well as other prominent VC funds. And 2Tap was purchased by Honey, which in turn was purchased by PayPal in a very significant exit. Early in his career, Radu worked for the Romanian National Research and Education Network. Its primary role is to provide advanced data communication services to all major academic institutions, research centers, and other cultural institutions across Romania. In other words, he is a very accomplished tech guy from the beginning of his career. I'm looking forward to this conversation because it's going to help us think about selling to manufacturers and improving manufacturing. And of course, if we can improve manufacturing and improve profitability, that frees up money for sales and marketing. And most manufacturers don't invest enough in marketing. We probably ought to have a 3 to 5% target investment in marketing. I think most don't do that. There's also the disruptive impact of AI and how different folks think about that and how it's going to change the manufacturing environment. So with that, let's get started. And thank you for joining me, Radu.
Ed, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And school me on how I properly pronounce your name.
My last name, oftentimes, it's not even worth it. It's just, I always spell it. My first name, Radu is absolutely perfect. There's an Eastern European way of saying it, but the rolling R sometimes is difficult. But I had mistakenly corrected people when they say my name correctly now. So,
all right, but pronounce your last name for us, so at least we hear it correctly.
Spineanu.
Spineanu, and so with the rolling R, it would be Radu.
Radu.
Got it.
Yeah,
Can't do it, but I understand it. It's good to have heard it. All right, let's jump into AI and Humble up front, because I think that's going to give us some context. Your work in AI goes back for many years, long before we kind of started hearing about it. How did it start?
Definitely. I still consider, I am definitely a latecomer. The AI started probably, in the 60s. And what happened, this whole new craze basically started in around 2010 with AlexNet. And a lot of people know that when a gentleman first created, I believe, a convolutional network that used GPUs use GPUs and just like a neural network to solve a very difficult problem. And then in 2010, 2020, there was this whole idea of development and deployment, and mostly development and research in the industry. And then the Transformers model came out, the Transformers paper came out, and Google had gold on their hands, but they didn't know it. And the Transformers model, basically what it meant, it was a much more powerful way of running a training on the GPU, basically being able to fully use the GPU. And then what happened was a small group of people at OpenAI realized they should just scale Transformers, and that's how we got where we are.
So when would you say what's kind of the advent of the modern age of AI?
I think the first hints were given by GPT-2, but these were just very basic hints like, oh, this is very interesting. Before GPT-2, there was like LTSM, which was pretty much nobody thought it was going anywhere. It was LTSM, then was like for vision convolutional neural networks, and then it switched to GPT-2, and people were still considering it like, this is weird. And then everything changed when GPT-3 came out.
And what year was that?
I believe 2020 or 2021. I'm not exactly sure.
All right. Now, your investor, Vinod Khosla, was also an investor in OpenAI. Did that give you kind of early access and early insight?
No, I mean, with like Khosla, it was just a normal formal VC relationship. I would say I was closer to Sam. Sam, I would consider him a friend. He was our group. I've known him before YC.
And by Sam, you mean Sam Altman from OpenAI?
Yeah, he rejected us the first time I applied to YC very early on. Then he was our group partner when he did get in, and then over time, Sam oftentimes showed me kind of like side projects to do, and always did a good job. So in 2020, when GPT-3 came out, I was like, oh, this is absolutely amazing. And I emailed him and I said, hey, Sam, can I have access to GPT-3? So I was, for a couple of months or a month or so, I was this private group with like an amazing group of people like Gwern and a couple of others who are just like brilliant, and who are like playing around and testing GPT-3, and it like blew our minds. But GPT-3 was still 2020. It was still like, we knew this changes everything, but it was still far away from when it became mainstream. It still felt like it was in a bubble. And then even I stopped using it for a while, for 6 months, 8 months, because the technology was just not ready and the form wasn't ready. And I got distracted about other things. And then there was a new wave, because like with AI, oftentimes in waves, the new wave was when ChatGPT came out. But ChatGPT came out, as you know, a year later. And it was, they didn't even know it was going to work. It was just this, like, they weren't unsure. And then when ChatGPT came out, it was the same model, tweaked a bit, but just a different format. And that's when it really connected with people, like, oh my God, this is insane. And it basically went viral overnight.
Right.
That's when the modern craze started. So I felt like, for me, like I've obviously taken Andrew Ng's course about the foundation of deep learning when I was before 2020, but I would say everybody started taking it really seriously around 2021, 2022. Not everyone, but like the current wave of people.
Right. So we're recording this on July 3rd. Just yesterday, July 2nd, a video posted of Khosla making a number of predictions about AI, saying that the years 25 to 30 will be a period like having an amazing personal assistant. The 2030s will be a period of corporate extinction, where 10-person companies will be disrupting enterprises. And he says the 2040s are going to be a period where work is optional. I have a hard time wrapping my mind around that.
It's hard not to agree with that. The more the deeply you work with AI, the question is if it's not going to be sooner. I would say it's not if it's going to happen. Like, I'm not a rationalist, I'm not an accelerationist, I'm not any of one of these people, but the groups right now, there's like the rationalists who believe AI is going to end everything. There's the accelerationists that, it's over, we should just push as much as fast as we can. And the rationalists are, they have the 2027 project, which they expect that there's a significant breakthrough in 2027, which is going to start everything.
And is that AGI, or is that breakthrough something different?
I think it's AGI. I believe so. That's their take on it. And internally, it's very hard to not agree with them, in the sense that there's the question of what is intelligence, what is general intelligence, what is super intelligence. The question is, if you think about the conflict right now in the negotiations between Microsoft and OpenAI, where the contract is after they have AGI, OpenAI doesn't have to give the models to Microsoft anymore, right? They cannot agree on what AGI is. I'm not going to be able to say it either because it's very hard to define it.
So it's interesting. I mean, we can argue about whether mobile devices are good for kids, and we can have arguments about parenting styles and cognitive development, those kinds of things. But this is really a fundamental philosophical debate in parallel with the technical evolution. And certainly one of the things that I think most major faith traditions agree on and emphasize is the importance of work. I mean, work is core to us as humans in terms of creating purpose and also honestly constraining some of the counterproductive human impulses that, if people are busy doing work, busy hands, I forget the expression, the biblical expression, but essentially, if you're busy and working hard, you don't get yourself in predicaments. I'm not sure it feels to me like people not having to work is a good thing.
I agree with that as well. I think there's a general, if you go in Silicon Valley, there generally is just a state of confusion. There's the people that just have put blinders on and they just go, forward. Let's just see what happens.
Right.
And there's the belief that there's this competition right now between China, and there is between China and the US. And I can tell you what people believe internally. What believe internally is, let's say there's a country and one country develops AGI faster than the other country. Because of the exponential benefits that you get once you hit AGI, then the belief is if someone starts even 2 weeks, gets AGI 2 weeks before, and they started playing it, because of the exponential curve, the other country will never be able to reach it. Now, is that true or not? It's just a theory, but I have heard that thesis repeatedly. And the desire for like a lot of people that have a lot of power and a lot of money and stuff like that is like they want the US to win. They shouldn't be considered necessarily evil or power hungry. They already have all the money.
Do they want the US to win, or do they want themselves to win?
I don't know. I would like
fair answer.
The US to win. That's what I hope deep in my heart. That's the thing.
Right. All right. So if I were to rephrase Kozla's kind of this timeline and his theory, it sounds to me like, so initially it's helping us do it more, whatever it is, do more, faster, better. And then the next phase is it's going to be doing whatever it is for us. Is that a fair distillation?
I haven't seen what he posted, but I would guess, yes, that is the belief. I mean, you have to also understand that a lot of these companies, when they say things, they might believe it. The time frame might be off, but they're saying things because they're raising money, right? If you're in the middle of a fundraise, then you're going to say the stuff to attract attention and to get the PR and create FOMO. And a lot of people, I'm always surprised, but a lot of people just buy it. The timeline is unclear, but if you think about what happened, in the early 2000s, right, with the dot-com bubble, most of those ideas and most of those companies, like everything came true, like they were saying 20 years ago. Like the companies, the ideas, they don't believe anything on the internet, right? 20 years later, everything is true, right? So everything they're saying AI now is likely going to be true. The question is, what's the timeline?
And so there's that great quote that you often hear used in situations like this from Gates, where he talks about people often overestimate the speed with which change is going to happen and underestimate the magnitude of change that's going to result.
Yeah, I agree.
So in conversations, I've heard you say that you continue almost on a daily basis, I think, to be personally astounded at how quickly AI is advancing.
Yes, and I think that is true for anybody that works in AI and in technology right now. Even in private chat groups, we have like other kinds of founders. The thing is, you build something and it just becomes obsolete 2 months later, and it's called I've seen people saying the shifting sands of AI because you just don't know what to build anymore.
All right, so let's talk specifically about Humble. What was the trigger event that prompted you to found Humble?
I wouldn't say there was one trigger, right? As a founder, after I sold Honey and I left Honey, I did my time. You're always looking for something else, and you're looking for different ideas, and you're testing different ideas to see what works. And I think for me, the getting to where I am with Humble has been a progression of a couple of years of testing out ideas, testing out technology, and working in a certain direction to end up at where I am right now. And the reason I picked manufacturing is this might sound corny, but when Andreessen wrote the I forgot the name of the article, but about going back to building in 2020. Even though if you look at the actions of Andreessen, they just invested in crypto. I believed it. I do. I'm an immigrant to the U.S. and I genuinely believe, and I want the U.S. to succeed. I want to live in a world where U.S. is the leader. I think the benefits of U.S. as an empire has brought more benefits and more richness, more advancement to the world than any other empire. And I genuinely wanted to succeed. And I understand the theory of the golden goose, right? America turns paper into products, right? Just a dollar for products. It's like this amazing system that they've created where you can just print paper and get stuff. I get that. But the question is that healthy or not? I'm not sure. And I think the people that I've met in manufacturing have so much have so much headwinds. Like everybody feels it's against them. They cannot get capital. They cannot get people. They're fighting unfair, different prices from China and other countries. And I just feel that we should. There's so much innovation that can happen in the physical.
So, in other words, I think what I hear you saying is that there's an altruistic element to the way you focused Humble on manufacturing. It's not just a place where you think you can make the fastest third exit, but you believe fundamentally in the virtue of building stuff in the U.S.
100%. I knew when I was going to manufacturing that this is going to be 10 years. I've understood very clearly when I was going in is that this is one of the slowest industries that are happening right now, right? Or if not the slowest, right? I think healthcare is pretty bad from a timing point of view, but the manufacturing is worse, right? I don't think there's one worse than manufacturing. Maybe agriculture.
So it feels like, well, agriculture, I would argue, I mean, they've got drones now that fly over the field to figure out what fertilizer to drop down to the square foot, I think, in many cases on the field. Yeah. But Joe Lonsdale certainly is a big name among, he's helped spawn a number of companies and a number of entrepreneurs that seem to be kind of at the intersection of manufacturing and technology, tend to focus on defense. But still, there's a lot of manufacturing associated with it. But manufacturing is a long way from the Bay Area, figuratively and literally. The steel bending parts of the U.S. are very different. What's your sense of can people in the Bay Area really understand the reality of manufacturing?
There are people in the Bay Area that do. And they are I have friends who 25-year-old 30-year-olds who, for instance, I have a friend called Alex who built previously a robot for making food. Okay. And I know for sure he understands manufacturing, right? Because he actually built done robots, etc. But there's not a lot. Right. I wouldn't call it like a very large number. If you're asking me if Joe Lonsdale, if Palantir, if Alex Karp, the answer is they've proven that they can crack a very hard market, which is governmental work. In a way, what we're doing is very similar to Palantir, to the point of almost the same idea of Palantir. But I would definitely go onto the side of they can understand the manufacturing. What they might not respect is the current state of the manufacturing. Meaning, when you go to the production plant, which is in Wisconsin. Just random example, right?
Right.
And there it's 40 people and 50 people, and they just love one another. They really do feel like a family, and they're manufacturing stuff, and they're happy, and they're a contract manufacturer for something, and they're making 50 million or 60 million. I think perhaps that is an industry where they just don't want to think about. It's just too small for them, if that makes sense. But I do believe they understand it.
But there's also a difference, and Anduril may be breaking this paradigm, but there's a difference between manufacturing and selling another software license. You can scale selling software licenses as fast as you can figure out how to help people onboard and implement them. On the other hand, you reach a point in a manufacturing business where you need another plant. You need to hire more people that just simply don't exist within a reasonable commuting distance. You need to expand your supplier relationships into new areas where maybe your consistency and quality of supply isn't going to come. So scaling manufacturing is an entirely different proposition than scaling technology. That may be one of the areas where there's some misunderstanding too.
To a certain degree, I would have agreed with you, but the one thing that points in the other direction is, and again, like, it's weird because I'm promoting them, but like, they're also my competition, but I do respect them. And I mean, obviously, like, it's crazy going. I mean, Palantir is a cult, which you don't want to go against culture. And I'm afraid that there's a fear, but like, I like them. I cannot help I like them. Anyway, but if you look at it, Lonsdale and Carp, and I think other people are starting a new bank right now.
Right.
And one of the things I keep on hearing is the reason China has been able to grow so much is because it's so much easier to get loans to start these businesses. And I think one of the things that make me think that they do understand it is this idea that they are creating this bank. They're creating this bank, and which is going to be focused on the real economy. So if they can bring more capital to manufacturing, that is going to help manufacturing a lot.
So in other words, a whole manufacturing ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I had a conversation with a guy a couple of days ago who talked about the burst of investment in capital equipment in manufacturing that happened during COVID. And he offered a number of ideas about why it happened. Certainly PPP funds were used to enable a lot of growth in physical plant investment. But he argues that basically what it did was pulled forward a lot of the investment. And so companies are seeing a drop off now, not so much because the need for production capacity is falling, but more just because so much of the capital investment got pulled forward. So there's definitely all these complex factors that interrelate in different ways.
That makes perfect sense.
All right. So Humble specifically, tell me what Humble proposes to do for manufacturing companies, and to whatever depth you're comfortable sharing at this point.
Definitely. And we're still learning how to pitch ourselves. And I think we had this direction, but the way, as you know, the way we're pitching ourselves right now is a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to try to focus how to, perhaps on the high levels, on the impact. But the core idea is, up until now, digitization as a concept, right, didn't make sense. It was, for the past 20 years, a lot of people have been talking about it, right? And there's so much companies that did digitization, but when you talk to like the actual person, they will tell you that we did it, and it was just an expensive thing, right? It took them 6 months. It cost them $600,000. At the end, it didn't match the reality on the shop floor because they had to change so many things, because that's the challenge in production, right? You have to always to change how you're doing to become more optimal. Because this is so complicated to build software, it's a shifting platform. The second is, it promoted all this data. It created all this data. Everybody has a data lake. So most companies right now have a data lake internally, like manufacturing floors and so on. Then nobody looks at the data. And even at the highest level, they might have some dashboards and stuff like that. But they don't, there's still someone in the end always ends up in Excel, right? It always ends up in Excel. And
in manufacturing, it's only Excel. It's not Google Sheets.
Exactly. It's always Excel. And the Excel breaks. Like, I generally have seen someone running their schedule on Excel I mean, multiple people running on their cell, and the problem is like, listen, this Excel file is just crashing on us.
Right.
And so this is all changing. It's changing for the one simple reason is right now you shouldn't digitize for humans. That's our
You
goal.
shouldn't do it.
You shouldn't digitize for humans.
Okay.
You are going to have the super intelligence. The super intelligence is AI, as we talked about. It is coming, and the knowledge layer is built by these all these companies, all these like billion-dollar funnel companies. And in the future, what you want, and this is the future people are talking about, hey, an AI is going to run your factory. It's going to fix all their problem. It's going to find the employee that's slacking off. It's going to find the device that isn't configured properly. It's going to figure out how to shift your things around to become better. But the truth is, AI pretty much is garbage in, garbage out, right? If you give it really poor data, it's not going to work. And so that's the reason for the first time in history people should do it, is because one, the AI will code the digitization software for you, which by that I mean it will code a combination ERP, PLM, MES, WMS, QMS, any kind of these acronyms you can think of on demand specifically for you. There's no more modules. I think like people still think about components, modules. I'm talking nothing like that.
Well, the generation of people leading most manufacturing businesses started in their careers when they would buy shrunk wrap software installed on local servers with IT teams that had to keep it running. So the idea that not only have we moved past SaaS, but we've gotten to the point where you kind of snap your fingers and a custom version of MIS and ERP is built for you, that's hard to wrap minds around.
100%. And even for what we're doing, like, we're surprised at what the capabilities are. And so once you start with this and you start digitizing, creating a digital twin, and suddenly you start capturing the real data and the proper data, then the second thing is you have to act on those elements. Like, the AI needs to be able to communicate with the people on the shop floor, with the management, with the PE company perhaps owning you, and all these things. And it really needs the idea of rebuilding everything from scratch. And to be clear, like, that's what we're doing. That's what Palantir is working on as well. And it's very interesting for me seeing like companies that still provide perhaps components with modules and so on, raising tens of millions of dollars, because I know in a year all that technology is not going to be worth anything, because you're going to have a system that can build it overnight for you.
Wow.
So, what are the business outcomes? I think that you would ask me completely. Sure, Radu, this is so interesting, but it doesn't matter. Business outcomes, at the most part, is giving you another brain inside of your company, right? Imagine someone that, at the beginning of the day gives you a report of everything that happened yesterday and ideas for you to do. And then if you like them, it automatically spans a bunch of things that gives them to different people to do on the shop floor. It means, your schedule is always up to date. You don't have an Excel sheet. You don't even understand how the schedule works anymore. You just have given some things, some constraints, and it starts getting...
Okay, so I got to pause you there, because we're talking about a community of people who have been told for 30 years that they need to understand in rigorous detail what's happening so that they can continuously improve it and refine it. And now you're asking them to abandon that and back up and just trust, guidance that's coming from the ether, telling them this is how they need to do it.
It's weird, isn't it? It is. Like,
weird is one word for it.
Yeah, and scary. Like, it is. Like, in the beginning, my philosophy is going to look like a toy, and it's going to make mistakes. Right? That is my philosophy. In the beginning, it's going to make mistakes. It's going to feel like a toy, and it's normal, right? But then, just like AlphaGo is a very good example, right? AlphaGo, if you remember, was one of the first super AIs that went viral, and it was this AI created by DeepMind, where he was learning how to play against playing the game Go, and it was just like the other one beat Kasparov, this one beat all the players of Go. And the reason it beat players of Go all the big one players is because, sure, it had reinforcement learning and it learned all of them, but it was coming up with ways that people weren't thinking about playing the game. And and I think that's what's going to happen. The AI is going to come with ideas that you've never thought about before, right? And I think there's this idea of like AI cannot generate original ideas or anything like that. That is one belief. But let's say that's true, even though whatever they're talking about will be fixed. I can tell you that, in my case, and let's say I've started companies, I'm a good programmer, I've done promotions, I've done other things. My main partner of brainstorming right now, outside of my team, obviously, is AI. Which means I go and I brainstorm and I don't blindly do what it tells me to do. But I do use it as a platform to give me ideas.
But let's talk about scheduling. I mean, if essentially what you're doing is proposing tools that will help companies improve efficiency, and you've identified in a number of cases that scheduling, production scheduling, whether it's bottling or other kinds of production, is a major area of inefficiency. There's a lot of cost inherent in the scheduling system. There's a lot of inefficiency that results from kind of marginally optimized scheduling. So there are costs there. However, at the same time, this feels like an intractable problem. People have just said, this is the nature of the world. This is what we have to accept. This is why we've built these structures around it. And they don't necessarily think of it as a problem. And so you're talking about asking people to conceive of problems in areas where they don't think they have problems. That feels like a hard thing to do.
They're called forever problems. I think that's what I heard the term, like forever problems, someone saying. I think that what happens is, you're right, like that's part of our challenge. And part of the challenge is not that they've got burned so many times, right? That's the problem.
Yeah, everyone's got ERP nightmare stories. They were supposed to get put in for $500,000 3 years later, and $2 million, and their third consultant, it's still not working right. And that is people's experience with digitization in many cases.
Exactly. Like that is exactly what happened. And people still, like, to think about why that is happening is because, again, like we have this story, right? You have, two factories making the exact same nail and they function completely differently in the background.
Right.
And the problem is, up until now, up until you had generative software, the idea was that you had to create a software that can support everything, right? And it turns out that the actual problem space is so large that in manufacturing is you might as well, just make custom software, right? SAP is this huge thing, I forgot how many, like 400,000 table, 8 million pre-created forms. I forgot the exact numbers because, you start going down along those paths and the problems, the scope creep, right? It's still more, bigger, more. And at some point what happens is like you wake up like 5 years later from starting whatever you're doing. And at this point, nobody knows how to use your software anymore.
But you're still paying whatever it is, $200,000 a year just to maintain it, right?
Exactly. And everybody learns mechanically, right? It never says, oh, I use 100% of my product. You pay $500K, you get install ERP, you're using it for finance. But then obviously it has a planner module, it has the WMS module, right? But even getting those modules working together, it's a full-on job, and it won't do exactly what you want them to do. So you're forced to go into their own life.
Right.
And
So take us through an example that folks here will understand. I mean, many of the listeners build capital equipment, for instance. They sell it into other manufacturing operations. Paint a picture that shows how one of their machine customers might turn to Humble to somehow improve operations. And if scheduling is a good example, then kind of get a little bit more granular with it, or maybe you've got another example.
Yes. Let me think about how granular we can get. Like, let me give you an example, right? Let's say, in contract beverage manufacturers, for instance, right?
Okay.
The way we keep on learning how to position ourselves and how to sell ourselves. This is the current iteration. The way we're doing is we We go to a potential customer and we ask them, we just do a discovery call, and we ask them, like, describe how things are going internally. Tell us your challenges. What are you struggling with? What are your priorities? Where are you losing money? Where do you have Excel? What Excels do you have in your organization? Tell us about that. What is actually painful? And they oftentimes, the answers surprise us. Sometimes we talk to chemical manufacturers that tell us they have these bottles that they ship products to, and that's their biggest headache, because that's their actually the unique selling point. It's the recycling of the chemical bottles, right? It's always very unique. You don't think of us as a person building products. You don't think about that ahead of time.
Right.
So what we do is, like, we tell them, like, listen, you've been burned by so many other providers. Here's what we'll do. Let us interview some stakeholders. Give us, after shifts, give us 15, 20 minutes and we'll interview a bunch of people. Send us a bunch of Excels and just describe in words what you're doing. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to build you a custom software that is kind of like a digital twin. I hate using the word, but it is kind of like a digital twin for digitization for what's happening on the shop floor. We are going to build that. We're actually building that using AI. So for us, we actually just feed it the transcripts of the calls. We don't actually go and pretty much build it ourselves. If at the end of the first week we don't have something that we've digitized that you can play around with, it's okay. We'll give you back the recordings. We'll give you the SOPs we generated from these conversations. And worst case scenario, you've eliminated some tribal knowledge from your company. And this is going to be nice. The instructions, the interviews, the actual SOPs documents, and it's a very nice. It's like, it will help you. If you do like the software, right? Once you've digitized a couple of things, then the next step is, okay, you want to do a prototype with us, a pilot with us, and let's figure out what that means. And at this point in time, we need a bit more engagement to actually understand what are your priorities, right? Scheduling, it could be you're focusing your can making, could be your inventory, it could be something else. It could be you want to optimize some machines, you want to add some AI so you can have historic data based on recipes and how to configure them for future runs. And we build that for you. And we usually like to do 24-hour sprints where we generate a piece of software and then you give us feedback. 24 hours later, AI will generate something else for you. And then we iterate, and hopefully we get on this very fast. The magic of it, I guess, would be that you can also do this yourself. All we're doing, especially in the beginning, because we're just beginning our company, what we're actually doing is talking to an AI. That's truly what we're doing. If at some point you want to do this yourself, if you want to do something, right, you can start doing. There's not going to be these crazy implementation costs, right? And we talked about it. The implementation costs, it's double the market. It kills the time. You have it and you cannot change it, right? And people are so afraid to change. I've heard of situations where ERP providers were asking for $15,000 more to just add a text field, which is having the lot number when they receive shipments or something like that.
But the rip and replace, they're afraid, is going to cost them $3 to $5 million and disrupt the company for 3 years. So they pay it. They're hostage to it.
They're hostage, exactly. And it's like the mafia tax, right? That you have to pay them every year, like that 20%, or depending on how it is. And in the end, like, our goal is not necessarily, our goal is to be able to help you move faster and to bring intelligence, right? Our goal is not digitization and scheduling, right? Which the focus of what we're doing. Those we think are the precursors of having this super intelligent inside of your organization.
But a lot of the people you're talking to have been told to be very wary of custom software. I've said it myself many times. I see people trying to build their own CRM, and I say, what happens when that guy in your company gets a real attitude, doesn't fit with the culture? You need to get rid of him or her, but they're the only one that knows how this thing's configured, and it's mission critical for you. Now, custom software is dangerous. Be careful of it. And essentially what you're saying is everything should be custom software. So how do you maintain that? How do you know that it will be reliable in 3 years if you found your operation on this?
So, let me give you an example, right? like you said, there's a gentleman who built this custom software, right? Or a lady who built this custom software, right? There's someone that coded this, right? And this is even at SAP. There's people that coded SAP and then left, and they did all these things, and then there's this idea of the burden of knowledge, and this is also talked about AI a lot. And if I can make just a slight detour, it's like the burden of knowledge means that as humans, we have to keep on learning. We get born, we have to learn, and then we unfortunately pass away. AI doesn't have this problem. AI can learn forever. It can get better forever. It can specialize forever. Similarly, like here you have employees, and you have employees that built your company and they've done various things, and then they leave, right? And that is sad. But it's just the nature of humanity.
Sure. Right.
So in this case, with what we're building, I would say the benefit is it's not us coding it. It is an AI that codes itself, the platform for you. And the way it coded the platform for you, right, it knows the reason why it built that for you, right?
And is it documenting the way we've been told good software needs to be documented?
Yes. So, for instance, whenever we have our own components of update Humble and etc. and so on, and as long as you keep the database, you have a full-on history of everything that was requested, everything that AI asked, and everything that human answered. And it doesn't do that right now, but in theory, it could always go back and ask, hey, why did you implement this? And it's just bring it from the context, putting in it's like remembering it. Again, it's not doing this right now. I didn't think about this particular use case. But that's sort of like the philosophical difference where we don't have the burden of knowledge.
Well, I love the term you used earlier about latent knowledge, because in manufacturers, that's a huge problem right now. There's so many people retiring out of manufacturing, and so many people that instinctively understood the difference between the science and the art. Paper has grain, and people that work with paper all the time in other manufacturing steps understand the impact of humidity and static and different pulp suppliers and the length of time it's been sitting in the warehouse and all kinds of things. And they can interpolate those factors instinctively, understanding the art, and adjust manufacturing operations accordingly. And increasingly, that latent knowledge is walking out the door. And a way to codify that latent knowledge, much less incorporate it into a digitized process, sounds very powerful.
It's true. I've heard about that a lot. So many people leaving just because of natural retirement, and
right.
Like I've heard of situations. You've heard of probably so many of people that have 30 to 40-year-old machinery, and it's working great. It's still much better than a lot of the current modern alternatives.
Right.
And they don't want to replace it. Why would they replace it?
Right.
And I think being able, like you said, like we were thinking about how to capture that as well. And I think we have some very interesting ideas on how we do that. But like there's going to be so many apps that remember us when part of the AI is going to remember us. Sorry to go dark, but like part of the AI will remember us when we pass away, right? There's all these like tiny companies where you can already see in consumer, and that's the beauty of it, right? The AI can understand what you're talking to it, what you've history of a bunch of things, and then they can replicate a certain person.
Right.
So I think, it's more likely better to have an AI if you can get it working reliably to build something for you, because less burden of knowledge.
So this idea of replacing mission critical software is certainly not without precedent. There's a big story last summer about when Klarna, actually a company I think you partnered with in your startup, Klarna had dropped Salesforce CRM, decided to basically code their own apps in-house for much of their sales and marketing tech stack. You described it. I'm sure it's an oversimplification, but you described basically we can prompt AI, sit back, have a cup of coffee or a beer, and let AI create custom enterprise software for us. Is that the world that we live in?
Yes. Yes, that is the world we live in right now. I just want to make something clear. It is surprising to me as well. I know this sounds crazy, but I've been working on this with my team for sort of like a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And we started building with the belief that technology is going to get better. And I think, a lot of people that do AI I'm so sorry, a lot of people just used ChatGPT and thought that, had an experiment with it. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. And I think what people are missing is how fast AI is developing. If they've asked ChatGPT something 3 months ago, and they're asking them right now, it might be completely different.
Right.
Absolutely completely different. It might look like the same interface. It might look like the same thing. But unless you keep up that, there's a new Gemini Pro version or a new O3 version or something like that, which is like a new revision. It was launched a month ago. It's impossible for you to know. It's not very friendly. But the differences between these revisions are insane. And even for what we're doing, we have this component that magically updated the system. And it started working probably 2 months ago. We were building it, architecting, prompting it. It was always making mistakes, or there was, we have someone who controls can do all the pieces manually as well. And for me, we did a demo even earlier this week. And the gentleman gave us just a specification for a process they're building for contact lenses, and we were able to give him something in 8 hours. Was it perfect? No, but the whole idea is to give it in 8 hours. We configured it, which was an hour because it was thinking about it, by talking to it, and then we literally left. And I did something else, he did something else, whatever, and we hopped on a call 8 hours later. Let's see what it did. And it built like 90% of it, but it wasn't obviously perfect. So
were you nervous? I mean, did you look at it before you looked at it with him?
No, I literally have the call where I was telling my team that I'm YOLOing this, because it wasn't, it was more of an experiment with a consultant. So I was feeling comfortable doing it. I wouldn't do this to the customer, but it was really an experiment. I was like, I'm going to YOLO this. And I have the recording, like it did mostly, it was like 90% okay, considering the data I gave it. But then the beauty of it is like, it didn't matter. Then we're like, okay, we don't like this, change this to this, change this to this, change this to change this to this. We gave it the loop again, and then we left again. And then, 8 hours later, it would have done something else. And the function of 8 hours, to be clear, it's only a function of our rate limits, because everything what happens right now is about parallelism. So there's a couple of things that need to be done sequentially, but then in theory, we could, the way Humble works, we could update a bunch of things in parallel, and we could drive this down to, let's say, 40 minutes instead of 8 hours. But it's just, we would scare our LLM providers because it'd be like a burst of like exponential things.
All right, so paint your vision for the production floor in 2028. Is everything a lights out factory?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think the lights out factory, I've heard about. I mean, I've heard people where they have already lights out factory for some things, and it's very hard for me to imagine that they won't need humans. I'm actually curious how you see this. I would genuinely be curious to see how you think about lights out factories.
Well, so I project I'm Gen X, kind of on the Gen X boomer line. And so there's no doubt that as my German friends say, there's an expression in Germany, take it in with your mother's milk. I took in with my mother's milk the expectation that people have to stand there and do things. And I completely understand improved efficiency, and I understand digitization. I can't visualize in most situations a lights out factory, but I also recognize that may be a subject of my constrained thinking rather than reality.
I feel very similar to that. I just cannot imagine the edge cases, especially all of industries, and being able to automate everything. I think the robotics side is interesting, and the way they're saying right now is like, hey, the next frontier is pace for LLMs, and you're going to have LLMs, but there's this idea you're always specialized robotics for a specific task will always be more efficient than general humanoid robotics.
Right.
And so general humanoid robotics are likely going to be very successful for humans. Like that's one of the things that like probably are counterintuitive, but humanoid robotics are likely going to be the first market are probably going to be consumers.
Right. Makes sense.
Which is, completely not what people are writing right now. It's harder for me to imagine humanoid robotics in factories taking over like all kinds of crazy stuff right now.
And certainly there are concerns. I mean, a video a couple of months ago of one in the lab that went berserk, and they were fortunately able to shut it down. But for companies that fail to adapt, I mean, there's lots of dire predictions. Do you think a company that fails to adapt suddenly hits a wall and crashes in 6 months from successful enterprise to a dead business, or do they just become gradually irrelevant?
I mean, I think when I talk to people, they look at AI as just another wave that will come and pass, like the digitization wave, like all the other waves.
Right.
And they've done the same thing for the past 30 years, right? The way they've done it, and it's always worked. And they know human connection to people, and I truly respect their vision. Similarly, like there's in technology, in what we're doing right now, there's still even for, let's say, coding, right? People that have this belief of like coding is going to be here forever, and it's going to become just better, just going to accelerate people, and it's going to augment people. It's going to be, but the thing that is different between this shift and other shifts, like the industrial area and so on, is that for the first time in history, what we're automating is knowledge. And once you have knowledge that you can pay for, that perhaps is smarter than 90% of the world, right? And more so, you can parallelize that knowledge. What I'm talking about, and I think when people don't realize this, I'm not talking about going and talking to ChatGPT and giving you an answer, which might not be able to run a company. I'm talking about what happens when you have 10,000 of different personalities, structured in a different way, starting to think about the problem. All of them smarter than one individual person. And they're all chained together and they flow together and stuff like that. Now the question is, who will you trust more?
Right.
Will you trust your foreman, or 10,000 of these things that probably have data fields from information from like 100 manufacturers, 1,000 manufacturers? Especially since for these AIs, especially as the costs are going to lower, are going to be 100th of a cost of the foreman that you have right now. That is a weird future.
For sure.
So the question is, what will happen? I think what will happen is they will be priced out of the market by competitors. Not priced, and that's not the right word. The competitors will figure out how to move faster.
Mm-hmm.
Or to have these new ideas, like I mentioned the AlphaGo, which wasn't possible, which people don't think about. They will. I mean, it will be the classic thing, right? Like those companies with AI will be able to run cheaply because they can outsource this knowledge to an AI that is cheaper.
Right.
Versus you will be stuck with this very high cost, which you have to send back to customers. And so you will be priced. Priced is the wrong word, but you will die because you cannot afford to sell your products at the same price levels that your competitors using AI would. And I don't know the timeline for this. Like even what we're doing right now, right? This in our case, it started working in the past 2 months, and we still have to figure out how to deploy this. Whether it's us, and I hope it's us, but like this future is coming.
Right. All right. I want to transition in a minute into some of the sales lessons that we can take from this. But first, we're going to detour a little bit. You're Romanian. You've lived in the Bay Area for many years. That's a relatively unusual story in my experience. Tell us about that journey.
Oh, yes. So I was born in a small town in Romania, and I started my first company in Romania out of college. And I was inspired by this friend of mine who I knew when he was very, very poor, and he started this company, and he was very successful, and he gathered this group of people that were working on Saturdays and Sundays in the house, and I loved that energy so much. And I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And so I started my first company in Romania, and then I realized that like the math just doesn't make sense. Like it was just like very hard to. It would take me a very long time to basically make anything meaningful. So what we did is I moved to the US in early 2010s, and we sort of like we just for the first 3 years, honestly, it was just understanding the culture. There's a very big culture shock when you come. There's so many differences between Europeans and Americans. Like Europeans, are much likely to be modest. Like they communicate through vulnerability and oftentimes sharing negative stories. In the US, if you when you arrive for the first time and you share a negative story, people think that, oh my God, this guy, poor guy, he's not gonna make it. Like he's lost because everybody's so positive and stuff like that. And
Even though
so,
most of them are bullshitters.
yeah, I mean, it's just like it's you try to bond for vulnerability. And there's so many things, especially in the Bay Area, which is a very, coming from all kinds of a society that's much more direct than coming to San Francisco. When it's a culture much more like radical candor. When you give someone feedback, you have to make sure it's framed in the proper way and so on.
Right.
So once I kind of understood those kind of things, which again, it took like 2-3 years. My former co-founder and I were the first Romanians accepted into YCombinator.
But you had your IPO in Romania before you left Romania, right?
No, that IPO actually happened after I left.
I see. Okay. All right.
Yeah. I basically owned like a very big chunk of the company, but I had left because I understood that it doesn't make sense, right?
Got it. And you mentioned your friend. Is entrepreneurship and the idea of a successful exit celebrated and revered the same way in Romania that it is in the U.S.?
Surprisingly, yes. I know that like probably the belief is like Europeans just prefer kind of modesty and stuff, but in particularly Romania as a country, just joining the European Union and made it so rich, and that successes are, I believe, celebrated. There's still a degree of tall poppy syndrome, but it is celebrated.
And how about failure? In the U.S., many people won't invest in somebody that doesn't have a failure on the resume, but in some cultures, it's shameful. Is failure a black mark in Romania? Is it riskier to start something up there because of that?
Yeah, it is. That is absolutely true. And there's a lot of shame in failing in Europe and in Romania as well. Like people talk about it, they are less likely to give you money, etc. Where in the US, I feel it's not the failure. What I've learned over the past 15 years is not necessarily the failure that gets celebrated, but if you fail big, you'll be successful. Like the Adam Newman story and all the other stories. If you fail majorly, just fail big. And like buzz and being able to prove that you can build buzz and stuff like that.
Right.
I think there's a lot of there's stories of companies failing or people failing and nobody caring. Nobody cares if you failed or not,
Right.
before, which is great. But the failures that are celebrated in the US, if you think about it, are the big failures. And
Right.
investors love big failures because it means that they're able to like do something.
But there's also presumably legitimate lessons that are learned along the way that then you'll avoid making those mistakes in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I love experience, and I think like age should be celebrated a lot more. Like I think one of the things that we lost as a culture is the celebrating wisdom, and that's very sad.
Right.
And maybe this is my thing of perhaps more being Eastern European, but like I actually still highly respect the idea of wisdom and elders that have wisdom and stuff like that. And
so speaking of age, communism fell in Romania, I think, in 1989, and Ceausescu was executed essentially by a mob a few days later. I think it was the only country where communism fell violently as the Iron Curtain came down, but I'm guessing you probably weren't even born then?
I'm very old. No, I was. And so what happened was we wasn't executed by a mob. So the way it worked is he realized he was in deep trouble. So he took a helicopter and he was trying to fly out of the country. And I don't know the exact story, but he got betrayed, and the helicopter dropped him in a certain area of Romania where there was some military, when he went to a military tribunal. And the military tribunal was basically run by a bunch of people that were actually started the revolution.
Got it.
And so it wasn't mob at all. It was very like, hey, this is like infighting between like his former people. And then it's weird because it was on Christmas and they executed him on Christmas Day.
Mm-hmm.
And we all saw it. Like I was 4 at the time, or 5 at the time, and I still remember his execution. It was like,
Wow.
it's kind of weird, but there's a certain generation of people. It's like, yeah, we saw this guy being executed. I remember it clearly. It's a core memory.
Wow. So there must be some impactful stories. I mean, perhaps some of your own recollections besides that, but certainly stories that your parents, grandparents shared with you about living under communism and the opportunity that it represented when you no longer were living under the yoke of communism.
It's true. I mean, our Ceausescu's vision, his idol was North Korea. So, like, literally, the guy visited North Korea and he met with Kim Jong Un's father. I think with Kim Jong Il. I don't want to butcher this. And he was so inspired. He said, "This is amazing. This is what Romania should be."
Wow.
So in 89, 90, when the communist regime fell, like Romania was basically a North Korea, like poor, hungry, with an industrial base that was really old and you couldn't do anything with it, and in the hands of the former security people, right? Meaning, you had the secret services, so those are the people that still ran the country. And I feel that like the first 10 years, and I think this happened in Russia as well, where like everybody was stealing things, right? You had, again, the people that are part of the secret services, and they privatized all
Right.
the national corporation, and they sold it because they make so much money. On my end, when I was just growing up in post-communism, one, I got to see all the horrors of communism, but also I grew up in a thing of possibilities where it was still complete freedom. Everybody was confused. We were learning they didn't have time to change the communist textbooks, right? They kept on changing things, but we were free to do anything. I mean, I think this was happening in the US as well, where like parents didn't know what their children was doing. So it's when growing up in the 90s, we could just go out for days in the end. Our parents had no idea where we are, and it's helped us get a lot of confidence.
Right.
But I can tell one thing is like those 10 years were, after the 10 years, there's a lot of people that shouldn't have got very rich.
Right.
Looking back now, like 35 years later, Romania, and again, I live in the US. I consider myself more of a US person. I come here sometimes to Romania, and like it's a very intellectual thing looking at where the Romania is right now. But like ideally, it's like Romanians have become very rich, right? They've gone from being one of the poorest countries in Europe with the country with one of the highest GDPs.
Really?
Sorry, not highest GDP. Highest GDP increases, like that. Their GDP is growing very fast.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't want to say, God forbid, we're just not sorry. The increase, GDP's Romania is increasing incredibly fast, and you talk around to here to people, and first of all, I don't understand how can they pay for some of the things, because some prices here are just like San Francisco.
Wow.
But you talk to them and they're just like, yeah, we've solved our money problems. And obviously these are the people my generation who are in technology. I don't want to, there's still a lot of poverty, to be clear.
Sure.
I don't want to diminish that. But compared to where it was, like capitalism is absolutely amazing. Like the ability of people to start companies, it's just, I love it because, in the US, there's a lot of, I understand where the US is right now, right? I understand like the wealth inequality, and it's really, really, really horrible. So I don't want to take away the fact that the US needs some solutions. But where I grew up, like my personal experience was seeing country go from North Korea becoming this very rich country because of capitalism.
Wow.
So I cannot not appreciate capitalism.
So when you're in San Francisco, what do you miss most about your first home? Is it something to eat or drink, or some kind of a festival? What do you miss most?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, my family. Sorry, I know, Corey, my family. That's the main thing I hate. It's not just an answer to say honestly my family, because everybody is still here. That is the absolute truth.
Interesting. All right. So, how about investing in technology startups yourself? Do you do any of that?
Yes.
And what do you look for in a founder?
Mm, honestly, here's what I believe. I've invested in, I think, 36, 37 companies up until now. This, except, this, not counting the funds that I'm an LP in. And I think I was a YC reviewer. I mean, Y Combinator had a program where people were invited to review YC apps, and I was very good at it. At some point, YC offered to pay me to review YC apps, and at some point, someone might have floated the idea of me having a job at YC at the admissions. And one of the things I asked them is, how better do you feel you are than just at the seed stage, or the pre-seed stage, than just throwing darts at like a board or something, right? Just random stuff. And I think what YC understands better than anyone is they said something they're like probably like 6% better. Meaning the thing one should know inside YC is like nobody knows anything, right? There's a company gets 3 months and they have more data to think about when to get to demo day than anybody else, right? They spend 3 months meeting daily, not daily, meaning weekly with the company, getting updates, getting all the intimate information. And at the end of demo day, there's also some companies that appear harder than others. And what they say always is you never know. Coinbase was not a hot company. Airbnb was not a hot company, right? There's so many examples of companies that were really hot and never went anywhere. And so here's what I believe about seed stage. And I think this is the reason why C exists is because people think they can make bets at the seed stage, informed bets at the seed stage, which I don't believe that's possible.
Okay.
I believe at the pre-seed stage and the seed stage, it's purely a numbers game. You do a call, and the person on the call you avoid the obvious red flags, right? Have to make sure like that person is smart, that person doesn't, is not, it's just the most basic checks, that it's not an obvious, just crazy, obviously bad thing. And then you just give them money, right? I think in my success, I think the company that I invested in that had the biggest success, I don't know what the return is going to be, but it's a company in Iowa. It's completely not Silicon Valley, not whatever hardcore like AI, anything like that. It's just a company in Iowa, and it's random, right?
And can you share what they do?
They provide telehealth.
Okay.
It's a healthcare company, so they provide telehealth backend for most of the telehealth companies right now, and that's a wave that's growing like crazy.
So it feels like disruption. You were disrupted as a youth with the fall of communism. You're disrupting with AI. Certainly, healthcare is, I think everyone agrees, rife for disruption. Feels like maybe just kind of part of who you are.
I appreciate you saying that. I just want to be honest, sorry, but this is going to be like, I generally, my external opinion is like, I'm surrounded by really, really smart people every day. Like like the reason I like living in Silicon Valley is because I'm surrounded by really smart people all the time. And honestly, when you're surrounded by, this kind of like hardcore ambition and success and drive and stuff like that, and I've accomplished like 5% of like what the people around me have accomplished. But to be clear, I'm very happy with that. It's not.
But I think it's not just smart; it's also impatient. There's this combination of, we're going to think bigger and more creatively and more aspirationally than most people may want to, but we're also going to get off our ass and work the 80-hour weeks, and we expect to have this done in a quarter as opposed to still be talking about it in 3 years.
Oh yeah. Have you heard of 996?
No.
So this is this is the internal discussions right now for like most of these startups, where the new generation of companies are pushing everybody and their employees to work 996, which means 9 to 9, 6 days a week. And I think if
you mean work-life balance and foosball tables are passe now?
Yes, they're 100% passe. You have to understand, right now they're talking about military rations, like eating military rations So you save money as a startup. They
Wow.
give military ration instead of lunch to your companies.
All right, let's pivot to sales. You've sold a lot over your career, and you sold very successfully. You obviously participated in selling to public markets on your company's ability to generate revenue. You sold to very sophisticated investors on your vision and ability to execute. You sold to strategic acquirers of your business. How did you ever have formal sales training, or was that just because you were able to articulate your vision with passion?
No formal sales training. I would say, I think in my previous company, I was also very lucky to have a very good co-founder. And I would say we were very good balanced to one another. He brought something about, we mostly did sales together, and he brought this very belief in confidence in what he did. And I would balance him on the other side where like people really resonated. The combination between the two of us worked incredibly well.
Got it.
I would say that selling to manufacturers is very hard because it's very hard to talk to them, right? They're very busy. They don't take meetings. Versus I've heard like, I've done cold calling, and I'm working with someone who does cold calling for all kinds of markets. And oftentimes he told me he works with like also VCs and other things, right? But it's easier oftentimes to talk to a CEO of a billion-dollar company than to talk to a busy plant manager, which I know it makes sense when you think about it, because sure, the CEO, that's his role, is to answer phone and talk to people. So I don't want to make a bigger deal, but like manufacturing people are incredibly busy, are very, very busy. And I think historically in tech, there was much more openness to trying things. There's no culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's huge. You haven't really, if I understand your background, you haven't sold products that much. You've sold a solution to e-commerce sites that recognized they had a problem. They
Yep.
were open to experimenting. They believed that technology always presented the solution. They just had to find the right one. And there was relatively little downside because you didn't have a large upfront cost. You were generating revenue on each transaction. So a lot of people bought it, but all you had to do was essentially make them aware of it. You didn't have to sell it.
Exactly. And we had to make it. When you search for some terms we were doing before, which is like whatever, universal shopping cart, universal API for e-commerce, there's like 3 companies you could pick for, and then you can just talk to all of them, test all of them, and see what worked.
Right.
No cost, no anything, right?
Right.
It's this idea of if you're looking for something, just go and make the deal. I think, and in general, like solutions work, or at least they do most of the things they work. I think like you said, like in manufacturing, they can spend ridiculous amounts of money, like 6 months of their company lives, and I do feel like, I haven't been, right, so I'm relatively new to this industry, but like from the feeling that I get and I talk to people, is they were just lied to. They were like salespeople that literally lied to them, and they didn't understand what they were buying,
Right.
and
But the salespeople sucked and never tried to understand what the prospect needed. I think certainly some salespeople lie. Maybe I'm naive. I think in most cases, the salespeople are just naive. They know what they're selling, and that's the story they want to tell, and they're not really particularly interested in whether it's appropriate. They just want to get the sale.
Yeah, sorry, maybe that was the right way of framing it, and that makes a lot more sense. There's, in the end, it's all about incentives. You put a person an incentive that they have to sell a unit, and that their job depends on it. In a way, they're doing whatever they can to do that.
So you've been on this journey. Something triggered you. You saw some warning sign or some KPI, or you missed a milestone that said, geez, my traditional playbooks aren't working. Manufacturing is different. And it sent you on a journey to learn more about selling to manufacturers. What created that awareness for you?
Like, yeah, that's a very good question. So, like, I have a bunch of people that I hire to help me, give me advice for, like, modern, reach out and manufacturing sales and stuff like that. And part of this process was like they're also running regular tech companies, right? They're doing like let's say the AI SDRs or the CRMs, right, or the bunch of other things, right? And we tried a lot of playbooks that they were running, right? And the same messages, the same ideas, the same templates. I had my instincts of like, hey, let's try these images. Then you also did the call calling, or so the call calling, and you have these people who are selling, even to hospitals of things that work, and like they were easier to talk to than a lot of these companies. And I realized and then advice I was getting was at some point after I collected enough information and talked to enough manufacturers to get an idea of who they are as people, I realized that the advice I was getting from generalistic agencies and stuff like that didn't make sense. And I could tell they didn't make sense because one, I had tried it before. Two, I already had, they were telling me to say something is like, hey, like I've heard this person telling me the exact opposite or so. and and so I was like, this is obviously something it's very different than particular. And then the thing that is interesting, I think, is this idea that if you look at it, there's a graveyard of companies trying to penetrate manufacturing, right? People don't start ERP companies. You're told not to start ERP companies, not start MES companies. Someone told me like, yeah, something like this, like, oh, haha, no company in this space has traction or something like that. And then, obviously you have the naivety or the innocence of like, oh, I'm sure I'll be able to figure it out, which is obviously silly. But there is a reason, right? There is a reason why manufacturing is so far behind in adopting technology. Even though, maybe I'm saying something too extreme, but they're kind of even for a lot of industries. And, I do believe that sometimes you have to ride the wave. And this wave that is coming with AI is a great opportunity to basically disrupt this like 30-year-old SAP. I think to a certain degree, like Palantir goes different in market, but there will be overlap. And but our competition, I don't think is each other. Our competition is to a certain degree Excel.
Yeah, the status quo and indifference and indecision and hesitancy about AI and hesitancy about digitization of software. I think you're right. What's the hardest sales habit that you've found to overcome as you start to understand how manufacturing is different? What's your instinct from before that you have to bite your tongue and say, no, I'm going to try it differently now?
I think, the obvious answer is like, not showing the product, thinking about the values of the benefits and just digging deeper into like the actual use cases. I think that's what I used to do. I used to talk a lot about the product.
But you also used to be selling to a mid-level marketing shopping cart optimization kind of a person, and now you're talking about selling to the CEO, right?
Definitely. When talking to CEOs, we try talking to plant managers. Correct. It's much more difficult to navigate the hierarchy of this, right? Because oftentimes the decision makers in the previous company, you could hop so fast to like from the person who was interested doing the research, the person to the top, you're like literally a call away.
Right.
And you did the first intro call, you pass that, and you go to this other person. And I do feel there's a lot more hesitancy here to even give you to the next person on the line who you have to hop, right? It's much more difficult to do that. And the benchmark is so much harder. And, navigating like so much decision makers, like sometimes like, like I've heard is like the decisions to buy a certain type of platform happens at the board level, right?
For sure. And certainly decisions about AI, because there's so much sensitivity to risk of AI, then there are a lot of people who are naturally inclined. The default position is going to be to say no. And you've got to figure out how to get all of them lined up to say yes, plus get the board and the CEO to say yes to something that feels like it could potentially disrupt their entire operation. It's not a $100,000 decision. They may feel like it's a bet the company decision.
It's true. And to be honest, we're still learning how to navigate that.
Right.
We haven't figured out anything. And I think for a lot of, like, if you look at what Palantir is doing, is like they are, they have massive credibility because they're working with anyone and they're using that credibility to get. And I think that's a perfectly valid strategy. But I think, again, the status quo is, how do you get people to understand that using SAP is a risk, right? I feel like that is the question.
Right.
How do you get, because SAP, in order to switch, like, they would have to completely cannibalize, because if implementation costs go to near zero, then a lot of their ecosystem goes down. So there's a huge incentive, the innovator's dilemma, basically.
Right, and the sunk cost question.
And the sunk cost question, exactly. And
All right, so obviously you're operating at a very sophisticated level, but for the rest of us who want to be familiar, who didn't get early calls and invitations from Sam Altman to participate and learn about this, if we want to be familiar and conversant in AI, what resources do you recommend? Blogs or YouTube channels? I assume not books because it's changing so quickly, but where would people like me who don't really have the sophistication go to keep up with this?
I would say, the default answer is like what we always read is a bit of Hacker News. Hacker News is Y Combinator's sort of like news platform.
Okay.
Where it's like Reddit, but specifically for tech news. And I think just go on Hacker News and read comments. And I think even there, they're like very LLM unfriendly. They still is this idea of like existential crisis that people are going through, but it's still a great place to learn, even if it's sometimes a bit geeky. I would say, other than that, to be honest, like, my source of information are Hacker News and private LLM groups and people telling me to try things.
Got it. And for companies who want to resist because they're worried it's going to cannibalize their business model, I'm assuming that your answer is you might as well get on board because it's going to cannibalize it anyway. You can't stop it from happening. Is that correct?
I am afraid so. It's very hard. I don't enjoy, like, I'm not going to be the person slightly smiling and saying yes.
Sure, I understand.
I'm not that type of person, but it's going to cannibalize. The question is, it's hard. It's probably easier to think what it's not going to cannibalize than what it is. It's nothing particular to them. Like, if you think about it, software engineer was considering one of the most safe jobs in the world like 5 years ago, right? And we do believe there's going to be like this huge wave of complete destruction in software engineering, right? And so, and not coming from a place of being arrogant, but and I don't, again, there's this idea of like everything you said about all the downside of what could happen, which there's no answers for. Like, the founder of Anthropic had this, was going and telling around people that, like, hey, like, this is going to have a huge impact on job loss. And he was telling politicians, you have to start thinking about this now. And he was like frustrated because nobody's listening to him.
Right.
He's trying, like, people are trying to say, hey, this is going to make a huge impact. You really have to start thinking about this now. And people are like, no, it's going to be fine. I would say that you have to understand AI. And I think you've done a good job of understanding AI. And I think the process of understanding AI is not just using ChatGPT. It's understanding that, like, once you parallelize, connect 10,000 intelligences with different prompts talking in, which is, they call it the agentic AI, but the core idea, if you don't want it, is just 10,000 instances talking with one another, right? And making decisions, or like acting and finding information. You will be left behind, unfortunately. Again, it gives me pleasure to say that.
So manufacturing folks listening to this that may not completely embrace or understand the vision of the future that you're painting, but nevertheless say, and I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Radu sounds like a guy that I ought to talk to that maybe will bring some value to our business. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
They can write to me at radu@humbleops.ai. And our website is very outdated, but I'm happy to give people and just talk to them and whatever they want to talk about. And
so you're willing to just kind of have learning conversations, not necessarily sales calls with people.
Yes, I can happily act as a therapist.
All right. Well, how about, can you act as their Obi-Wan to help them navigate this?
Yes, I'm more than happy to help them do this. And luckily, I also have a good network of friends who are building all kinds of companies in all kinds of space. So I'm also help them to connect them if we're not the right solution and so on.
And how about LinkedIn? Is that a good way to connect with you as well?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and I'll drop both the HumbleOps.ai and your LinkedIn profile link into the show notes. So wrap us up. Take 3 minutes and explain how AI is going to change manufacturing and how we need to adapt industrial sales to succeed in this new world.
The way AI is going to disrupt manufacturing is coming from the two directions, right? There's going to be the top level and there's going to be the bottom level. The top level, let's say the bottom level is something that they're playing with right now. It's at the beginning of robotics. Robotics are going to become cheaper because that's the main problem, and they're going to become smarter. So that's the foundation level. They will be able to automate discrete units of work using much more affordable things. At the top, it's going to become the knowledge level. The knowledge level, it means there will be, let's say your virtual digital foreman, and your virtual digital foreman will understand everything that's happening in your organization. Will understand the status of your purchase order, of your sales orders, of your equipment, of your people. Will understand the work that needs to be done. Will understand the schedule. Will be able to do research on the internet to find more whatever you're trying to find. It's going to craft their RFQs and so on. And once you connect these two, right, you can do but you can take it from both directions. And the future that you're going to have, like 5 to 10 years from now, is you hopefully maybe have less people, but maybe the same amount of people, who knows, but they will function at a much higher degree of leverage, which means if people do 1x right now, in 5 years, they might do 2.5x or 3x.
Wow.
They will be supercharged. And they will be also free to focus on a lot of other good things. So that's my optimistic vision for the future.
Wow. That's quite a world and quite a conversation, Radu. Thank you so much for spending time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And thanks to everyone for listening and watching. Do me one more favor, give this conversation a like, share it with somebody, drop a comment. Even if it's a challenge to some of these ideas that, this is imaginary, it's never going to happen, let's have that conversation. And please subscribe to the podcast as well. Thanks so much for listening and watching the Industrial Growth Institute podcast.